Hey guys, good morning. I wanted to start a little four-part series with you, coming out of Ephesians chapter 4 this time. We're going to do a little series on unity and what the Bible, especially Paul's letter to the church at Ephesus, says about unity. We're going to live in just those first three verses. So Ephesians chapter 4 verses 1 through 3. We're going to live right there, sort of as a, I don't know, more. It's not necessarily what I would call like a comprehensive look at unity, but really a starting point for us as believers. If you're not a believer, why unity is something that Christ represents, but if you are a believer, why it should be something you represent. It's sort of a starting point for how unity begins to be reflected and demonstrated in your life, and sort of also one of the big things, how you're less responsible for unity than you think you are. And so what I want to do is I'm going to read Ephesians 4, 1 through 3 to us, and then just sort of set up some context this week and talk about what Paul's trying to emphasize, and then ultimately land on why it's our what is our responsibility when it comes to unity, and why it's our responsibility to walk really in a manner worthy of the gospel we've been called to. So Ephesians chapter 4 says, "I therefore, a prisoner of the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace." And so this is Paul writing to the church at Ephesus. When Paul was writing, that's why he says like a prisoner of the Lord. He is in Rome, in prison, probably about to die. This is like sort of around 62 AD or so. He's probably getting ready to be martyred for the faith. And he's writing sort of in many ways, this is his sort of last farewell letter to Ephesus. It doesn't seem to have a really super important like overarching theme, but really the occasion for the letter is because he loves the church at Ephesus and he wants to see them united around the gospel. He's writing so that they might see that Christ is a unifying force, and that all people, specifically Gentiles and Jews, so Jewish Christians, people who are coming from a Jewish background, and then non-Jewish Christians, people who are coming out of a sort of a Greco-Roman background, that they are united around Christ, that Christ is a unifying force that unites them together. Despite their differences, despite their historical and cultural differences, Christ unifies them together. It specifically says by the bond of peace. I think today that can be extremely important for us to remember, that our background, our differences, our cultural history, so to speak, is not reason for separation, but in many ways that difference is found in Christ, and Christ uses that difference to draw us together, not to separate us. So there's a big overarching lesson for us in our current culture that difference doesn't divide, it unites. Difference doesn't separate, it pulls together. And so he's saying that, and he's also saying to the church at Ephesus that, hey, look at the unifying force of the gospel. Look at what God has done to unify so many people around one central theme, and that is God is to be glorified through the work and person of Jesus Christ. Look at what God has done, and he's doing that to show it to be so much better, so much more important, so much more sufficient than the sort of Greco-Roman gods that are sort of highly exalted in Ephesus. Ephesus was a really important city of the day, highly commerced, lots of money traveling through there. There was a big temple to Artemis. Lots and lots of people worshiping Greco-Roman gods. Paul's real intention here is to say, hey, look at the unifying force of the gospel to be better than everything else that you might be worshiping. And so the theme for this 4 weeks that I want to land on is really simple. Believers, so Christians, do unity. I hope that if that makes sense, that it is not our job as Christians to create unity. It is our job as Christians to maintain the unity that Christ created in his work on the cross. We do not create it. That is a responsibility that I've heard many Christians put on their shoulders, or many Christian organizations put on their shoulders, and many Christian organizations say that's their role or their job is to. The Bible would not give us that ability or that freedom or that right The Bible, especially here in Ephesians 4, says it's our job to maintain the unity that Christ has already created. And so for the next 4 weeks, specifically today, we're going to talk about 4 things. One, today, in the next 2 minutes, what does it look like to walk in a manner that promotes unity? Second, we're going to talk specifically about how we can walk with humility and gentleness as representations of Christ and how that promotes unity. Thirdly, we're going to look at what it means to bear with one another in love and with patience and what that does to promote unity. And then ultimately, what it means to maintain unity through peace, to be peacemakers. And so today, I love that. This is one of the first verses that ever caught my attention as a Christian early in my walk with Christ. It says, I therefore, prisoner of the Lord, this is verse 1, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called. Well, really simply, what have you been called to? And that is to represent Christ because of the work he's done in you, right, by his work on the cross. You were dead, I was dead in our sin. Christ came to the earth to save us from our sin, right? We are saved by faith in him, right, by grace alone. And then ultimately, we're called to walk. If you look at Ephesians 2:10, you look at James 2, 1 John 3, right? We're called to walk in the manner to which we've been called. And we've been called to represent Christ and represent his gospel well. And so how does that promote unity? And I think that is simple. Remember, our job is not creation of unity, but maintenance. And so if I'm called to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which I've been called, what does Christ do, right? What does the gospel do? It takes somebody who has lived a life of works-based righteousness, somebody who has made their whole life based on following the rules, going to church, sort of being the perfect Bible school all-star, and it takes them and helps them to see, hey, I don't care how quote-unquote perfect my life looks from the outside, I'm a broken, wretched, rebellious sinner just like everybody else. It takes that person who looks like the sort of perfect Christian person, even though they need Jesus very badly to save them from their sort of holier-than-thou, self-made righteousness. And it takes the person who is consumed with very obvious sin, sort of the younger brother in the prodigal son analogy, the person who from his very, very young age has been a rebel, has by the world standards just done everything wrong, hasn't gone to church, has sort of the guy who's done every drug on the planet. It takes that extreme, and it takes this person, and it is what? It shows that they're both sinners, that they're both broken, that they both are rebelling against Christ, that they're both pushing back on the obedience to Christ, that they both have caused themselves to be in a situation where death is their end. That both of them are equal, regardless of what their life looks like. They're both equally dead, Ephesians 2:1, equally dead in their trespasses, regardless of what their sin looks like. And it puts them on the same playing field. And then the gospel them and says, hey, we're going to say, it's going to save both of you. Faith in Christ saves both of you. You sort of older brother, self-righteous guy, it saves you from your self-righteousness. You sort of younger brother, rebellion, it saves you from your rebellion, your obvious desire for sin, your desire for wickedness, your outward sin, right? It saves you both from your sin. And it unifies you to Christ. And so both those things are true. And then both of them, regardless of where they came from, regardless of their heritage, regardless of their background, both of them then walk in a manner worthy of the gospel to which they've been called. It's the idea that Saul, who was a Christian killer, right? And then really, let's go with Luke, who seems to live a pretty placid life. It's the idea that both of them have the same calling, and that is to represent the gospel, represent Christ, be ambassadors for Christ to the world. Now, how is that a unifying theme? Well, you've got two very different people from very different backgrounds, and I would just say two is a representation of, you have thousands of different heritage, different cultures, different people united around one thing, and that is the promotion of Jesus Christ to the world as the only saving force possible out there. And so what you ultimately have is Christians from around the world, different languages, different backgrounds, different heritage, different cultures, different loves, different desires, all united around one theme, and that is the glory of God through the good of Jesus Christ who died for us, and they're all walking in one direction, and that direction is to make much of God so that the world might see who God is and see who Christ is and what Christ has done for them, and then come to know Jesus through their actions and through their words. So when I don't, and I'm going to wrap it up here, when I don't live in a manner worthy of the calling to which I've been called, Ephesians 4:1, I break from that unity. I don't look like the person, I don't walk like the person, I don't talk like the person that Christ has commanded me to walk and talk like, and I misrepresent the gospel to the world, right? It's the idea that I could walk into your home wearing basketball jersey, a pair of Jordans, and carrying a basketball and tell you I'm a football player. I would be vastly representing the basketball community and the football community. Why? Because I don't look, I don't talk, and I'm not doing anything that would represent football at all. I look like a basketball player. Same way with Christians, right? Christians can't walk into your home, walk into your life, walk into your culture, walk into your community and say, hey, I'm a Christian, and then their life look nothing like the calling to which they've been called. What's that do? That doesn't promote unity to the gospel. It pushes people away because they believe they can walk and talk and act and do things that are not consistent with the gospel and still be a Christian. That doesn't promote unity at all. That's how you end up with these outlying sort of extremist groups that believe, man, I can misrepresent Christ, I can walk however I want, I can do whatever I want. As long as I say I'm a Christian and I prayed a prayer once, I'm a Christian. Well, that's not Ephesians 4:1 at all. The most unifying force on the planet is the gospel, and it's our job to represent that unity in the way that we walk and the way that we live. Guys, I can't state this enough. The greatest way that you can promote unity in your community is to walk and talk and live the calling to which you've been called. That is the gospel, right? To walk and talk and live out the gospel so that those people in your community can see it, right? And they see that Christ has really changed something in your life, and then they're attracted to it. And that drives people to the gospel, which is ultimately the solution to our problems, the solution to sin, the solution to our rebellion, and the most unifying force on the planet. We don't create unity, the gospel does. But we sure as heck promote it, and we sure as heck can maintain it, right? By the way that we live our lives. I'm going to end you with this one. This is verse 3. Eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. It is our job to be eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit by promoting the gospel in the way that we live our lives. Live your lives in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called, and it will draw people to Christ. It will give you opportunities to verbalize the gospel, right? And that will ultimately create unity across the world. The answer to prejudice, bigotry, and difference, and problems with difference, the answer to all that isn't education. It isn't some sort of program to fix it. It's the gospel. And the best way that we put the gospel in the world is that we live in a manner worthy of the calling to which we've been called, promoting the gospel well through the way that we live our lives. Next week, we'll take a look at how humility and gentleness are ultimately ways for us to maintain unity. But for now, I just hope that you're encouraged that, man, you've been saved by a God. If you're a Christian, you've been saved by a God that loves you, cherishes you, and desires you, and wants more than anything for the world to know what you know. Live in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called. Love you guys. See you next week.